So now on to the main event. Melissa McGee from the Tennessee Commission on Children and Youth is going to be talking about improving child well-being in Tennessee and understanding adversity and resilience in childhood development. So at this point, Melissa, I'm going to stop sharing and let you take over.
Great. I've got to unmute first. So, all right, friends, it's so good to see. I'm not sharing yet because I like seeing your faces. But it's so good to see so many familiar faces. It's just been wonderful to kind of learn myself even more about traumatic brain injuries and how the intersection with adversity in childhood happens and what we can do to continue to expand that knowledge. I do want to say thanks to Charmaine Woods and to Patricia Slade and to Dana Cobb. They were all part of this group, this subject support group or system of support. I'm like, what words are we using? System of support group around adversity in childhood that kind of work together to pull resources and information. I just get to be the person that talks to you about it. But I also am not always excited about hearing myself talk for an extended period of time. So I've told Jen and Wendy, like, if you have questions, and I think, Jennifer, is it Jen or Jennifer?
I can be Jen. I like it both.
Okay, I just didn't want to call you a nickname you weren't a fan of, but Jennifer's going to monitor the chat and help us know if there's conversations, and sporadically I'll kind of check in. But just like Wendy said, we'll have opportunity for question and answer and discussion when we're done. I feel like a lot of you may be familiar with information. And so we'll just call it a refresher because it never hurts if you've heard it before. And we're excited about those of you that this may be somewhat newer information. So here we go, kids. This is going to be the real test, is sharing my screen and making sure there are no lovely black boxes involved. So give me like 2 seconds. Hide floating meeting controls. I feel like we're on a roll here. All right. Now, how are we doing? I can't see you, so you might have to tell me.
Looks good.
Looking good.
Perfect. Awesome. Well, we'll just jump right in the deep end of the pool and get going. My name is Melissa McGee. I'm super excited to be here with you today. I get the privilege of working with something called the Tennessee Commission on Children and Youth. We are a pretty small state agency, an independent state agency. We are overseen by a commission, an actual commission of persons who are the Commission on Children and Youth. There are 21 volunteers from across our state. They're appointed by a governor. They can serve three-year terms consecutively, and then they have to roll off of our commission. So we are actually, myself and my friend Dana Cobb, who may be here with us as well, we are the staff of the Commission on Children and Youth. And so we are not actually the commission, but we love the work that we do. And we're so glad we get to be a part of improving children and family experience and system work here in Tennessee. So excuse me, that's what I do. I'm also dealing with lovely allergies and sinus fun with all of our fantastic weather we've had in Tennessee in the past few weeks. So please bear with me if I sneeze or if I cough. I promise it's not anything terribly awful. So there was one more thing. Oh, I was going to tell you, I mentioned my friend Dana Cobb. The cool thing about the commission, I guess there's lots of cool things, but one of the best cool things that I like is we have 9 persons who live out in our state in the 9 development districts, and they're called regional coordinators. They are our eyes, our ears, our understanding of what is going on in Tennessee. And so if you are interested in learning more about those persons and don't know who they are, I'm more than happy to hook you up with that information. Or you could just go to tn.gov/TCCY and you can find who would be in your region that can help you if you need networking or resources or information. And to be honest, they're just kind of cool kids. So I'm biased though. So I just wanted to share that about TCCY and say thank you for coming. And we're just going to jump in here. Really today, I want to just give you some information about adverse and positive childhood experience, kind of talk a little bit about resiliency and what's happening in our state around these issues, because we're shifting a little bit, coming out of COVID protocols and things like that. We've also kind of started looking at what can we do to continue to move this forward. And so about, let's think, maybe around 2015 or 16, what happened was the ACEs study, or adverse childhood experiences. We refer to that as ACEs. came out of a study done out of Kaiser Permanente out in California. And we'll talk a little bit more about that here in a bit. But that study was a public health study, a population study, and it was in the mid to late 90s. And so it took a while for it to gain a lot of traction, but really in the mid to late 2000s, 2010, moving towards that, it started to get more and more attention. In Tennessee, we really started trying to be more aware, understand, and do things to address that in the 2010, 15 kind of range. And we're able to really gain excellent traction. One of the things we did is there's a 2-page document. We call it our case for ACEs. Really, it's a case for attention, but we call it our case. And so this is language directly off of that document. You're welcome to find that document on the TCCY webpage. You can use that language. You don't have to cite us, but if you're writing grants, feel free to use that, summarize it, whatever you need, but it's there for your taking and understanding and distribution. But the first sentence says what it says here: the future prosperity of any society depends on its ability to foster the health and well-being of the next generation. When Tennessee invests wisely in children and families, the next generation will pay that back through a lifetime of productivity and responsible citizenship. And for me, that is like one of the best opening sentences I've seen in a long time. And so I love that because it just hits the nail on the head with what we're trying to accomplish. And so when we think about childhood adversity, Wendy and Jennifer and Paula are going to be much better at incorporating those things into that. And my controls just showed back up, so I got it fixed. So we hope that we can help bring this, and Paula and Wendy and you guys that work in traumatic brain injury every single day can help us also understand how addressing early adversity and kids who grow into adults with traumatic brain injury history, can those intersect, how we even talk about that, address it. And that's why I'm excited about the brainstorming piece at the end, and discussion. That's just going to be probably my favorite part. So this is why we do what we do. And really, when Wendy started reaching out about this, we talk about ACEs and ACEs and ACEs, but really as we started to build out our training, we wanted to make sure we emphasize the part of, healthy child well-being, healthy childhood development, increasing our resources for families who have any sort of health concerns, mental health, behavioral health, physical health, which mental health and behavioral health are the same thing. But we just want to make sure that we focused on that whole picture, because we know addressing adversity is important, but how do we back up and help prevent and mitigate adversity as much as possible? So when we think about healthy childhood development, for those of you who live in Middle Tennessee, this may look a little bit like the Parthenon that's in Centennial Park. We just think about it like this really sturdy building with this foundation that is just like, oh, I got you. I'm going to hold you. And we want healthy childhood development to be just like that. We want to provide the strongest foundation we can, because when we do that, we know that these 4 pillars are going to follow along, that a child's educational achievement is going to be better. They're going to have more economic productivity. They're going to be more responsible citizens in their communities, and they're going to have a better lifelong health trajectory. And when we're building children who have those 4 key pillars in, coming out of a strong foundation of childhood, then we know we're building successful parents in the next generation. And that's when we start to mitigate things like adversity that comes, that creates brain injury, that creates even more difficulties further down the road. So when we're creating generation after generation, our health partners will know that's like, we call it 2-gen and 3-gen, then we're starting to build stronger communities and a more healthy economy. And so some of the questions we got, and still get occasionally, but more so back when we first started doing this work was, well, I don't work with kids. I don't have kids at all or in my house anymore. I don't have grandkids. I'm not a teacher. I don't run into kids. They aren't for me, however that looked. And this is one of the slides that we like to share and say, hey, this is why it matters for all of us. Because when we have stronger communities and a healthier economy, it matters for people like me who don't have my own kids, but I have a lot of kids out there that I invest in their lives. And so that's why it matters for all of us. And that's why we love talking about healthy childhood development, because it doesn't matter what you do. You could be the lady that volunteers at the library, at the church. and you're going to run into kids. Or you could be the person that drives their bus and you think, I don't have to talk to them, I just have to drive their bus. Doesn't matter. You still get to be a person of importance in that child's life. And so when we talk about healthy childhood development, we use these 4 core concepts. They come from something called the Harvard Center for the Developing Child. And I always say, in your spare time, go check out their website, because it is a dearth of resources. And I'm going to be really honest, Wendy, you don't have to answer this. I think I included that in the resource section of that document I sent, but if not, I can add it in. But it is awesome. And so in your free time, go check that out, because it is just such great information. But they worked on, developed, and really built out these 4 core concepts. So brain architecture, serve and return, toxic stress, and resilience. And that's how we talk about childhood development. Part of the reason we built out this training, and I didn't really explain that very well, but TCCY back in, I think, 16 or 17, we built this training out to be what's called a training for trainers. We wanted to teach other people how to consistently and effectively talk about the importance of healthy childhood development. And so built this out, and we've trained over 1,000 people in our state and beyond. I was blessed, and I would have been more blessed if it hadn't been COVID, maybe, but I was blessed to get to train 3 people from a grassroots organization in Tasmania, Australia. We did that virtually during COVID. But we trained them on this so that they could take it back to their grassroots trauma-informed work and try to train people in Tasmania. And so it's just so cool to see how far this has reached. So that's what we did, built this out so that we could build consistent conversation around healthy childhood development. This is how we do that, through these 4 concepts. So we're going to start with brain architecture. And this is just kind of a little bit of a fire hose to the face sort of thing. Because I'm going to give you a lot of information about a lot of things, and we could go way into the deep end of the pool. So feel free to ask questions. Jen can share those as we go if she feels we need, or we can address those at the end in the chat. But I get it. It's a lot of information, and we can definitely help in whatever way, whether it's now or at a future date. But what we know is really brain architecture supports, healthy brain architecture supports lifelong learning, behavior, and health, much like you see here. And the key to that is that our brains are built over time. They start with the simplest things in the earliest years of life. Those simple skills come first. That's what we have to master, the basics, right? Because when we master the basics, then we can start building the more complex skills on top of those. Until those simple skills are built, we can't get to the more complex skills. And the tricky part, and we'll talk about the tricky part later. This is the best part. You just want to build the simplest, give them the best foundation, because then we can move up to more complex and more complex and more complex skills. And what we've learned through research over the years is that the cognitive, emotional, and social capabilities are wound together like a tightly braided rope. I don't know if any of you are rock climbers or bouldering or any sort of climber out there. You guys use ropes to help tether you in, give you a base. Most of you do. Some of you are a little out there on the crazy, not crazy, but daring side. That's the way I should say that. And you don't use ropes, but most people use ropes when they're climbing rocks, and it's a safety measure. And what I learned when I worked at an outdoor company was that if there is any flaw in that rope at all, it's gone. It doesn't get used. It gets literally thrown away. At our outdoor store, we used to have what we called a garage sale. So the store was really great about taking returns for any reason. And so the returns that they got that were still in decent condition, we would sell at what we called our garage sale. But the ropes, the climbing ropes, never. They always went to the recycle bin to be used in a different way, because the climbers knew how important this tightly braided strand of rope, just like our capabilities that are being built in brains, the cognitive, emotional, social skills are wound just like a rope, such that when they're all there together, they're so strong that they can't be broken. The tricky part is when you start to get the little niches in the rope, and we'll talk a little bit more about that, because what we know is that building a strong foundation early really sets kids up for better success and better outcomes later in life. A weak foundation or a foundation with cracks, or even just little bitty things, increases the odds of more difficulties later in life. So we want to give our kids the best opportunity we can. And so that's why we talk about it like brain architecture. It's kind of like the building of a house. These early years matter because just like a house is built, you start with that foundation, and there's a certain order of everything that happens in the construction of a home. I have personally never built a home. I have purchased a home, but never built a home. And what we know is that it matters when things happen. They have to happen in certain orders. You're not going to put the electricity in before you put up the drywall, I don't believe. And so it's very important how that works, because we know that those early years matter so much. Between up to about the age of 3, you get 85-ish% of the brain volume. So what that means is not the smarts, obviously, but the size. There's so much going on in those early years. I think I have one more slide. There we go. Is that there are more than 1 million new neural connections every single second in that 0 to 2, 3, 4 kind of world. There's a lot going on. No wonder, I always say, no wonder babies' heads and toddler heads, they're kind of like weeble wobbles, like they're just so big because so much is happening, and they're learning and they're taking in their environment, and there's just a lot going on, right? And so when we think about how that brain is being built, it's important that it happens in the order that it needs to happen, because when we get it right the first time, then we don't have to address and try to fix things later in life. So you see here, if you're a visual person like I am, these are neural connections. And you can see as a newborn, there's already some going on there at 6 months old, and at 2 years old, there is just a lot, to the point that at, about that age 2 to 3, a child's brain has to start thinking, okay, what do I need to access the most frequently? Excuse me. And it's going to be those connections that it needs on a more frequent basis that is going to be the strongest. It's going to be the ones that they go to like in that knee-jerk reaction. So it's important that those most needed things are the healthy pieces. The experiences that happen over and over. A child is hungry and they cry, and you guys that are parents, man, you got the cries down. I'm not a parent and I don't have it as much, but I continue to be fascinated that as soon as a baby's crying, mama, daddy, caregiver, family, they're like, oh yeah, that's a poopy diaper cry. And I'm like, that is so fascinating. A poopy diaper versus a hungry cry versus a I'm not happy cry. That because you're in tune to that child. And so they know you're going to come and take care of them. And so those are the connections that are being built. But when we think about a mom that may be going through postpartum depression and doesn't realize it, hasn't addressed it yet, and just thinks it's part of quote their postnatal journey, they may not have the capability, and that child may begin to have connections that are more on the I got to take care of myself side. So that's why it's so important. We want that healthy foundation, because we want the connections that are reinforced to be the healthy ones, and the ones that are less exciting and less helpful to development be the ones that are what we call pruned away, because what's used less, it's got to start focusing on what it uses more. What's used less is going to get pruned away. And so you're like, well, that's great, Melissa. That's awesome. We want to build brain architecture. Tell us how to do it. Glad you asked, because we can do that. We, when talking about building healthy brains and building strong foundations, it really comes from what Harvard has coined as the serve and return. And so you see here, serve and return relationships are so important. Those interactions are so important. And it's really cool when you start thinking in this way. It's really cool to think, what is serve and return? Even in the grocery store, if you see a child in the buggy next to you, and they wave at you and you're like, hey, that's serve and return. If you're at a restaurant and a kid pops their head up over the booth and they're like playing hide and go seek with you or peekaboo, like that's serve and return. Anything. I always like to use that I think it's Geico. I'm not endorsing them in any stretch of the imagination, but Geico has that commercial where the dad has 2 kids on each legs and he's kind of lumbering through the house. That's serve and return. Anything where a child serves to you and you return, that's serve and return. Those are building skills. That's why it's so important for all of us, not just those persons who are involved intimately in kids' everyday life, but every one of us. The serve and return interactions are what's essential to build strong brains. And so systems that support quality relationships in all areas of life, but specifically in our early care settings, in our communities, in our homes, also support building healthy brains. And that's the coolest part, because when we support those, the potential for us to minimize harm, it just increases. And it matters even going up through adolescence, because the brain gets the biggest return on their buck early in life, like 0 to 3, it starts to taper, but still pretty good. But then it goes down to a little bit less. But in adolescence, we get a bump. And so we don't want to give up on kids just because they're 13, 14 years old, they're involved in the youth justice system. And you're like, well, just going to throw the baby out with the bathwater. Good luck on the next one. No, because even in adolescence and all the way through life, there's opportunities to help and improve. But in adolescence, you get a bump in the return on your investment. And we want to continue to support systems and families and communities that reinforce healthy brain architecture. And at that point, start helping build resilience even more so. So when you think about building healthy brains, you're like, that's cool. Serve and return. Got it. I'm going to do that. I'm going to think about that everywhere I go. I mean, it's something I think about now, honestly. Anytime I interact with a kid, it's just fun to think, oh, serve and return. Because it's kind of like that game of tennis or volleyball or anything that's a back and forth. You're just going back and forth. It's just super fun. And you're like, that's cool, but we're talking about adverse childhood experiences. So something has to disrupt healthy brain development. And you are correct. What Harvard has termed toxic stress. And so when we think about stressors, I'm going to flip back and forth between this slide and the next slide. I'm kind of a visual learner, so it helps me to see both along the way. So just bear with me if you don't mind. But we think about them in categories. So positive stress, tolerable stress, toxic stress. When we think about positive stress, you're thinking about kids and they're doing things that are kind of scary to them. Going to school for the first time, kindergarten, Head Start, whatever it might be, going to a doctor to get their vaccinations or shots or whatever the need, going to maybe have a babysitter that they're unfamiliar with. And those are positive stressors. You're meeting new people. You're kind of unsure of what's going on. But when, mama or daddy or caregiver takes that child to school and Miss Emily is at the door and she's like, I got this, you can leave. And Billy Bob is not having the easiest time. And Miss Emily's like, I got this. And you're like, okay. And you leave. And then 30 minutes later, Miss Emily sends you a text and she's like, please look at Billy Bob. He's rocking it. That's a positive stressor, because what happens when we get stressed is that we have a lot of hormones that respond to that. And they help us know, hey, you're stressed. Maybe be aware. And so specifically one called cortisol shoots up. And that's kind of what helps us know that, hey, it's time to respond to stress. So on the left-hand side over here, positive stressors, they are normal. They're an essential part of a healthy development. They help us learn how to manage stress. And that cortisol level shoots up, but as soon as that stressor is over, it comes almost right back down to normal. So think about if a child goes to get a shot at the doctor. Man, you, the nurses, the doc, you're all working hard and overtime to help this sweet child not freak out. They're starting to cry. They're building themselves up. You're promising all the things, ice cream, toys, whatever it'll take to help that child make it through this one shot, right? And so that you got the shot. And then all of a sudden, everything is great. Billy Bob is back to normal. Well, he's not crying anymore. His teary face is just red and splotched. And the first things out of Billy Bob's mouth is, can we go get ice cream now? That's positive stressor. You were there, the child made it over that stressor. It helps them learn how to respond. That's a positive stressor. When we think about The next level of stressors, the tolerable ones, those are the things that are going to happen in life. They're unavoidable, like death in the family, loss of a pet, a move. Those sorts of things are not good, but they're tolerable. They're things that also help us learn. So when your cortisol level shoots up from the stress, or a child's cortisol level shoots up from the stress, the important thing is that that child has someone who is safe, stable, and nurturing in their life. And that presence of that safe, stable, nurturing adult allows that child to understand how to manage a tolerable stress. The cortisol shoots up, and when that stressor's kind of passed, it starts to come back down to more normal ranges. It's just going to take a little while. We are modeling how to manage tolerable stressors with our children. And so that's why it's called tolerable. It's the presence of that safe, stable, nurturing adult that allows a child to see how to manage a longer term, more severe stressor, but a limited time stressor. So that sort of thing is very important for a child to have a safe adult in their life. The tricky part is when there is no safe, stable, nurturing adult present, and a child encounters a stressor that we refer to as a toxic stressor. It is a stressor that is ongoing or repeated exposure to things like abuse, neglect, a parent with an untreated mental health or substance use issue, things like that, without a safe, stable, nurturing adult, affect the way a child's brain develops. And so what you see here is they experience that stressor, man, and that cortisol level, it just shoots up. And because there is no safe, stable, nurturing adult involved, then that level just stays high all the time. So that child is literally living and developing in a flight, fight mode, fight, freeze kind of mode. And so their brain, remember we talked about the developing brain and how it's important to master the simple skills first. Their brain, depending on where it is when that stressor happens, can't get past what has developed because it goes back to that survival mode. And it's literally just trying to get through the day to day. I used to teach my kids, even when I was doing clinical counseling, I used to teach them, hey, when you hit that kind of stressor, and I didn't use the word toxic because I didn't know it back then, but I was like, when you hit that kind of stressor, it's like an alarm clock going off in your brain. I know if some of you will remember the round alarm clocks that had the two metal things on top and a metal clanger in the middle, and that son of a gun could wake up your next door neighbor. That's what a stressor like this is like. It's like a nonstop alarm clock going off, and so much and so long and so loud that a child begins to hear that as background noise, such that when you come in or I come in as a helper and say, hey, I just want to help, I want to help, that isn't seen as help, because what has become normal is development in this really high stress situation. And they've learned how to live and manage in this high stress situation. And when that is removed, that doesn't work, because they don't know and haven't been able to develop those more complex skills moving up. So that's when we're talking about stressors. We know that toxic stress really alters how brains are built. And this, you will not be tested on this later. The main thing I throw this in here for is because this little orange, it's called an amygdala, this little orange piece right there, kind of in the lower part of the brain, really is the one that turns on. It's about the size of an almond. It turns on when you get stressed. It gets bigger, it enlarges, and it starts to send that sign out that's like, hey, 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 you know, it's just the one that's like sending out the alarm. And if there's nothing there to keep that alarm or turn that alarm off, that's how the child is living. Constant alarm, constant, think about a fire alarm in a building, just constantly going off. And so what happens is down here, this hippocampus piece. So part of what the hippocampus does is it has a huge role in assigning mood and memory to the events that happen. That's why when you think about your senior prom and you think about the Van Halen theme that was there for some of you who live in my decade, you're like, all right, yeah. I remember going to that and dancing, you know, it's just like, oh, all the warm and fuzzies, maybe, whatever that memory might be for you, that you hear a song and something triggers a memory for you, or you see a picture. Maybe I think Wendy said she was in Innsbruck. is that what that picture was from? Maybe you've been to that very spot where that picture was taken, and it just triggers a warm, happy memory. That's your hippocampus at work. The tricky part is that also applies to negative things. And so when a child encounters that kind of toxic stressor, your hippocampus assigns, or their hippocampus assigns, a mood and memory to that. And so, unfortunately, things that you and I may not even notice may be the trigger for that child who is living in toxic stress. I worked for a little while at a residential facility, and I'm pretty sure I had some kids there with TBI that were probably undiagnosed. But I had some kids there, and I worked with kids there, and we had this education building, and all of our counseling office were kind of like in these very short hallways off of the main hallway in this education building. And so there were like 3 offices in each one, maybe 4, I don't know, but a few in each cubby. And so one day I came out of my office, and I'm just come out of the little cubby hole where our office doors were, and I'm walking down the hallway toward the cafeteria. And there was a sweet child having not a great moment in his life. And he was just fussing, man, and he was using all sorts of colorful language. And he was telling the mental health assistants that were trying to help him just where they could go and what they could do with themselves. And he was busy, man. He was busy talking to these 2 guys, telling them what he thought. The minute he caught sight of me, just walking down the hall, I'm not talking to them. I'm not trying to be a therapist for him at that moment. I'm just walking down the hall. He turns all of his attention to me. And I didn't even realize it because it wasn't like he came at me, but he turned all of his attention to me. And the next thing I hear, it's not funny, but it was just that moment where you're like, okay. And back then I didn't know all of this, and I didn't realize. It was just like, man, I've never met this child. He had just gotten there that day. So I didn't even know why he was with us, what his goals were. I had nothing. And all of a sudden I hear him saying, and that crazy, bleepity bleep bleep, white bleepity bleep bleep with that brown curly hair. He was just going off, because sometimes my hair can be curly. He was just going off on me. And once I started learning more, and he was going off because of my physical look. And once I started learning more about how our hippocampus really works, something about me, I'm confident, and more I learned about him, I know this is true, but something about my physical appearance, being white, having brown hair that was curly, triggered a memory for him and a mood. And I'm telling you, it was immediate. And so I like to tell that story because that's one of the ones that I'm just like, yeah, that makes sense. So that's why it's so important that we get this information out, try to help move resources to address early childhood stuff, even all the way through getting to adulthood, giving the resources they need, moving finances and money and policy to reflect that. And then we help move trajectories going forward. One of the coolest things that's happening out there is the study of epigenetics. And I say this all the time because I'm like, man, you really smart people, they are coming up with some really cool stuff. And so I'm going to tell you this, and there's a whole lot more to it. But the short version is there were some studies done down at Emory University in Atlanta. And epigenetics really means, how the gene expresses itself. So kind of like above the gene. We used to think, well, you get what you get. You got DNA from both of the people that contributed to you, and you get what you get. Like I'm 5'10" because my dad is tall. My mom is 5'2". Somehow I got my dad more than my mom. And so same goes with everything in life. But what they're learning through epigenetics is that experiences can change how those genes express themselves. So yes, you have the genes you have, but experiences can change how they express. And so one of the studies that they did down at Emory was looking at mice. And so they took a mouse and they had like a daddy mouse, and they're like, let's see how this goes. And so they, introduced him to mama mouse. They did mama and daddy things, and they had baby mice. And so they took, let me say this before they had baby mice. I missed a key part here. Daddy mouse, what they did was they exposed daddy mouse to the smell of cherry blossoms. And every time they exposed daddy mouse to the smell of cherry blossoms, they shocked his feet. And they did that, I believe, over the course of a couple of weeks. And so it was pretty regular. And then after that, they didn't do it anymore. But they monitored all of his reactions, his physical reactions, his behavioral reactions. And so they monitored all of that. Then they introduced daddy mouse to mama mouse. They did their thing, had baby mice. And so now we have Junior. And so the researchers are like, all right, let's see how Junior responds to the smell of cherry blossom. They never shopped Junior's feet now. All they did was expose him to the smell of cherry blossoms. And one of the interesting things is he had very similar reactions to the smell of cherry blossoms as his dad. Increased heart rate, increased blood pressure, anxiety, shaking. And when they measured, he had more receptors in his nasal cavity to the smell of cherry blossom than his dad had. So they're like, okay, cool. That's interesting, but he's grown up with Papa Mouse. And so maybe there's some environmental things going on over there. So then they took Papa Mouse and they artificially inseminated him with another Mama Mouse who had never met Papa Mouse, never spent time, but did that artificially. And they found Junior Mouse with the exact same sort of responses. And then they did that, believe one more generation down with similar outcomes. So while that is very early research and we're talking about mice, it is still very fascinating because it helps us understand more about how genes can express differently depending on the experiences that they have. So it's going to be fascinating to see how that research continues and helps us kind of understand more of that. I'm going to show you, this is just a short video. Many of you have seen it. It helps us kind of summarize all of what we just talked about in about 4 minutes. I don't know how much time we have, 2:47. I don't know what time I started. Maybe we'll skip the video. Let's just do that. You can access this afterwards. I think we put it in our resources section. So that's kind of the important part, 3 of the 4 important pieces of building healthy brains. We just want to build the best brains we can with the strongest foundations, the most certain return, and the least amount of toxic stress that we can. But what we know from something called the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study that I mentioned earlier is that isn't always the case. We're probably never going to get it to 0. We can aim to take it down. The original study was done out in California by a physician named Dr. Robert Anda and Dr. Felitti. I can't come up with his first name. I'm sorry. Dr. Felitti. And so Dr. Anda was at the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control, and Dr. Felitti was out in California at Kaiser Permanente, which for the record is a private health system. And if you have their insurance, you're employed by some part of their system. So these are people who had insurance. And as you see by the chart here, most of them were white. They were mostly middle-aged, had some college insurance, and they were insured. And there was over 17,000 responses to this study. So for those of you who aren't as nerdy as me when it comes to numbers, that's a really big number to study. So this is just talking about there were kind of 2 cohorts, those first cohorts of over 17,000 people. 3/4 of them had at least some college, almost 3/4 of them are white, and almost 85% of them were over the age of 40. And what the ACE study did was ask them questions about their childhood. And so you might think, well, they're over 40. How are they going to remember things before 18? There have been studies done to validate their responses, and it was validated. And so we know that this information is good, and what has been done with it since has also been helpful. These were the categories that they looked at in that study. So 3 categories: abuse, neglect, and household dysfunction. They pretty much asked, before the age of 18, did someone over the age of 18 who was responsible for your care physically harm you? And they would give examples. Did they emotionally harm you? And they would give examples. Did they sexually harm you? And they would give examples. And so the key I want you to know is I don't want you to just run out and go take this test if you're new to this work, because it can really trigger some memories that you may have just packed back in a space that is there, but you just kind of put it in the back a lot. But maybe if you have a counselor of your own, and if you don't, I always encourage that. Counseling during seasons of life is never a bad idea. But maybe talk with your counselor about walking through this, because depending on what, we put a couple of links in our resources to a couple of versions of this questionnaire. Some of them are a little less descriptive. If you find the original one, it's kind of descriptive. So we just want to make sure you understand, kind of what it is, and especially if you're going to talk to other people about it. The key is that you may remember something happening. You just may have never categorized it as abuse or neglect or dysfunction because it's just what happened to you. You're fine. And so that's why we're interested in making sure you are in good space and the people you work with are in safe space. Let me say it that way. Safe space when this happens. The percentages you see here are the percentages of the original cohort, those 17,000 people that endorsed or said, yes, this happened to me. So remember, we're talking about middle-aged, middle-class white folks with insurance. Doesn't always sound like the population that we serve through a government, public health system. 28% of those people reported some form of emotional abuse. Almost 21% reported some form of sexual abuse. 27% reported living with an adult who had a substance use issue that was untreated. Now, back in the mid-90s, you see here under the household dysfunction, mother treated violently. Papas, we love you, but evidently we didn't ask about you back then. So apologies, there's been more work done on that now. But, almost 13% lived in a home where their mother was treated violently. That's the kind of questions that the adverse childhood experience study asked. So here's kind of a chart from that original study. 64% reported having one and 22% had three or more. So that's almost a quarter of the respondents. That was way more than they anticipated. And the key is we talk about 10 ACEs now, and that's kind of what everybody has landed on. Originally, it was like 8 with a couple of categories, but it ended up being 10 different, experiences. So we have kind of all landed in a space where you could have, quote, 10 of the original ACEs. And what they found out is ACEs can really have a lasting effect. We call it a kind of a graded dose response. The higher the number of ACEs, the higher the chance that you're going to have adversity and more of it as you get older. So what they found is that as your ACE score went up, so did your chance of being obese, having diabetes, having broken bones, heart disease. You are more likely to smoke or have a problem with alcoholic or illegal drug use. And then your life potential was inversely affected. There were lower graduation rates. They had less academic achievement. They had more time from work, and they had higher medical expense the more that their ACEs went up. And so this kind of information was just new and fascinating to everyone. So it helped understand so much. This is a great video. It's 2:53. Wendy or Jennifer or Paul, can you tell me what time I should be done? I'm sorry.
Go ahead and share for sure.
Okay. It's long though, so we can send it out, but it gives you a little more. We'll just send it out. How about that?
Okay.
I think it's like 7 minutes long, if I remember correctly.
What we can do too is we can come back to both of those if we have time at the end.
Very true. But
don't try to end it at 2. Try to go for more like 2:05.
Okay, perfect. Perfect. So what this does is this gives you more details about the actual study, which is interesting in itself. So we'll send that out and come back to it if we want. So Dr. Anda, I'm a visual learner. Remember we talked about earlier. Dr. Anda put together this pyramid, which helped me so much. And so really he looked at it as your base number of adverse childhood experiences, and then how that affects life going up. So the broader your number, the bigger your number of adverse childhood experiences, the more likely you are to have a disrupted neurodevelopment. When that gets disrupted, you're more likely to have social, emotional, cognitive impairment. Remember, that's our tightly braided rope. When that happens, then you're more likely to adopt health risk behaviors. So I had a kid, I worked in an alternative school in Metro, Nashville. And, when my kids would come in there, they got kicked out of their regular school, but they got sent to us because we had a counselor and a case manager in every grade level, and they had an ED, an emotional disturbance. I'm not the biggest fan of whatever D stands for. I think it's disturbance on their IEP or their 504. So they came to us in hopes we could help with their mental health instead of going to whatever a normal ALC was. Anyway, my kids that would come to us, they, had adversity. Clearly, their development had been disrupted. They would come to school. Everything was going okay. And they'd sit down in class and the teacher would be like, all right, we have a pop quiz today. And they're like, oh, hell no, we don't. I'm out of here. Turn the desk over, get up, walk out, cuss everybody on their way, walk out the door, and then go smoke on the corner to help chill them out. Because what they knew is someone in their household was about to get a call about what just happened at school. So in order to manage their stressors, they adopted health risk behaviors. Well, I'm going to go smoke out on the corner. I'll see you all later. And so that's why when you kind of going up this pyramid, you start to see how everything is related, because when you adopt more health risk behaviors, you're going to have a higher likelihood of disease, disability, and social problems. And social problems, think things like incarceration as a youth or as an adult. And then you're more likely to have an early death. Persons in the original study with 4 or more ACEs were more likely to have a 5-year shortened lifespan. People with 6 or more ACEs had a risk of a 20-year shortened lifespan. That is not fake. It doesn't mean, hey, you have 6 ACEs, you're going to die 20 years earlier. By no means. That's unmitigated, ongoing exposure to stressors. So that's what happened. One of the best things that has come out is Philadelphia was like, this is interesting, but that population doesn't really look like our city necessarily. So they did a citywide study. They included the conventional ACEs. They also included expanded ACEs, witnessing violence, living in unsafe neighborhoods, experiencing racism, living in foster care, or experiencing bullying. And what they found was the majority of their respondents experienced, I believe it was 4 of these 5 expanded ACEs, in addition to conventional ACEs. So they just realized, man, it's not just necessarily about a person. It's about the environment, where they're living, what's going on, what led them to say have to live in foster care. So just really great information about that piece. So when the information about environmental adversity started coming, what they did was they took that original pyramid and kind of went underneath, because we know there's more going on. The adverse childhood experiences happen, but there's something in there. And so what the Rise Center did was look at the historical piece of it. So really just kind of general and historical trauma that's been going on in that family or in that, core group. And then the look at like social conditions. What's happening in their community? What's going on? How are they experiencing it? As well as the effect of microaggressions, implicit bias, epigenetics, all up and down this pyramid. So you can see that they have kind of updated the pyramid to maybe be more understandable to the normal people like me. So I really love this updated version. In Tennessee, we do have some ACE data. We haven't, I don't think we've had ACE data out since the 2017. I do know that the Department of Health just this year published their positive childhood experience. And I want to make sure we get to that. So I'm not going to dwell on this. We can get you more information, but the short version is Tennesseans really reflected the original study kind of closely. 61% had 1 and 28% had 3 or more. Remember, the original study was only 22%. So it was similar. What we're more excited about right now, and we're kind of shifting our work to support resilience building across our state. We don't necessarily do programming. We don't do any programming. We don't serve anyone. We try to support networks, communicate, build and educate around system improvement for kids and family. So resiliency is kind of the big thing for us right now. Dr. Christina Bethel is just one of the coolest kids out there. She's at Johns Hopkins, which is a university up in Maryland, Baltimore, I believe. And she's actually coming to hang out with us next week at Children's Advocacy Days. If you're interested, I can tell you more about that. But she started looking at resilience, and this is just a quote, I won't read it, but the main thing is the importance of everyday experiences for kids and in building their healthy brains. Because what we want to do, if you think about resiliency, is kind of like a teeter-totter. We want the teeter-totter to tilt toward the most positive things it can. And all of our teeter-totters may need different amounts of positive. So really, we want to understand where a family is coming to us in their fulcrum, because it's probably not going to be in the middle. It's not going to be terribly well balanced or even tilted toward the positive side. It's probably going to be tilted to where the negative outcomes are overwhelming at the moment. So we want to keep piling in to the positive side for our kids and families, so that we're shifting that fulcrum, and that positive thing is just like, we're going to do this. So that's how we kind of look at and talk about fostering resilience. Because you heard me say this earlier, every child deserves relationships with adults that are safe, stable, and nurturing. They need to be free from physical and emotional harm and know that. They need familiar routines and people and places. And then they need to be cared for exactly the way they deserve, nurtured and sensitively developed. Like, those are just what kids deserve at the base, right? Like that's the most important part. What Dr. Bethel did for this work is she did a study around positive childhood experiences. There are 7 of them, and I'm going to exit out of this, and all things could go right down the drain for just a minute. I'm going to stop sharing so that I can read you the 7 positive childhood experiences. They are: a child felt free to speak to their family about feelings. They felt family support during difficult times. They had the presence of at least 2 non-parent adults who took a genuine interest in them. They felt safe and protected by an adult in their home. They felt supported by their friends. They felt a sense of belonging in high school, and they participated in their community. And so what she found specifically, if I can find my mouse, I'll get you back to the screen. Okay, I found it. So what she found specifically is that 72% of her respondents to that, let me see here. Oh, there we go. To her study, let me say that differently. People who had 6 or 7 of those 7 positive childhood experiences versus people who had 0 to 2 reported having 72% lower odds of having depression or poor mental health. So 6 to 7, they had 72% lower odds of having poor mental health or depression when compared to people with 0 to 2. And people who had 6 or 7, when compared with people with 3 to 5, had a 50% lower odds of poor mental health or depression as an adult. So just really, really cool information that's helping us understand. And when we read through that list of 7 positive that she looked at 7, you're like, okay, that's just normal. Like, yeah, let's do that for everybody. Here's the 3 to 5 version. So really, I didn't really talk about air traffic control much, but building brains is kind of like kids learning how to do air traffic control. There's so much going in, and we want to focus on helping them build skills through that build executive functioning and self-regulation, so that all those things that are coming in, man, they know how to manage it. They know when the right time to do what is. So that's why those pieces are so important. We're really looking at like that 2 and 3 generation approach, investing in those early childhood approaches. Our systems, our Department of Health, our education, our human services, all of us, mental health, they're all working to build those early pieces because we want to not just support kid development, we want to support families and caregivers too. That matters. Ensuring healthier, this last bullet point, more mindful, socially connected caregivers really improves children's health. And so in thinking about the positive childhood experiences and where we can kind of intersperse those in that pyramid we looked at earlier, and there's opportunities at every level to intersperse positive experience that can improve child outcome. This is a tree developed by Dr. Wendy Ellis. There's 2 of them called the pair of aces, but it's starting to look more and more into those community environments that we talked about that could be adverse situations for kids. You see those kind of down here at the bottom: poverty, discrimination, lack of opportunity, poor housing. And I heard Wendy talk about, how do we help with homeless needs? So you see the outcomes of those roots up in the tree. This is why it's so important. So when thinking about Dr. Bethel's positive childhood experiences, then we kind of foster nurturance of the kids when we start building the opportunity for those experiences, when we start investing in safe parks, in access to libraries, in communities that are built together to support childhood development. Those are huge, because then I love this second bullet about building a society-wide caring capacity. That's what builds well-being for all of us, specifically for kids. So you've probably heard this a ton. Hey guys, I want to tell you, we were talking about this before Oprah wrote her book with Dr. Bruce Perry, just so you know. But the new norm is really shifting our conversation when we're talking to children and families away from what's wrong with you. And when I think about what happens with traumatic brain injuries, that's got to be a question, right? What's wrong? But moving into more about understanding that person's story. What has happened? You've had this injury potentially. Let's talk about that journey since then. Let's just talk about what's happened. And it may just help us be able to provide new insight, new understanding, new ways to approach what's going on with the kids and the families that we serve. And so I just used a whole lot of words and not a lot of time. And I know it was probably too much, but thank you for letting me share. There is my my email address. You're welcome to email me. If I don't email you back, you are welcome to email me again and say, hey, Melissa, you told me to email you again. I do pretty decent, but when it falls off the screen, sometimes I struggle a little more. So, all right, friends.